The shorts were slit a bit high, nothing that was outright shocking, but it was more skin than he'd ever seen on Stede before. The top was a short sleeve pyjama top with SB embroidered on one pocket in white, because Stede was the most delightfully extra person Ed had ever known, who was going to get into bed with him. There was supposed... Edward.
Hey everyone, Carly Heath here. This week's Minisode is narrated by Gutis, also known as Cheesecake 3 on AO3. I love that Gutis told me her interest in podfic narration is entirely blamed on this podcast. She hadn't even listened to podfics prior to us starting these minisodes. I love that. We've hooked another one with this art form. If you hear my cat, that's my cat in the background. He's very cute. Gutis is narrating the first chapter of Just Keep Your Eyes on Me by KalansPhantom and Pastor of Muppets. Though the overall fic is rated E, there's nothing explicit in this first chapter. Here's the summary. Edward Teach is in love with his best friend and co-owner of Revenge Therapies, but he knows that nothing will ever happen between them. When he's invited to a BDSM convention to give a talk about Kink Aware Therapy, he decides to take it as a chance to unwind and maybe find a playmate in the scene to destress. Because one of the other secrets he keeps away from Stede are the years he's spent as a dominant in the community. Instead, one Stede Bonnet appears wanting to support Ed as he runs his panel, except somehow the most oblivious man in the world appears to be completely unaware at just what sort of convention he's stumbled into. Ed must protect this man at all costs. If you enjoy this chapter, which I think you will, be sure to check out the rest of the fic on AO3. The link will be provided in the show notes. Without further ado, this is Just Keep Your Eyes on Me by KalansPhantom and Pastor of Muppets, and narrated by Gutis, aka Cheesecake 3 on AO3.
Chapter 1. Safe. Edward Teach was a lot of things, but today that thing was mostly hopelessly in love with Stede Bonnet. His every other Friday session with Ricky was goddamn exhausting. He was the most narcissistic client, and Ed felt like he'd rather bang his head into a brick wall, he'd rather eat his own face, than continue trying to get Rick to recognise fucking basic human empathy. He had finished finally, at a little after 6. Rick had no more than left than another knock came on his door, and Ed was gonna fucking scream profanity. Except, when he looked up, it was a blonde bombshell, dressed in a teal 3-piece suit and an enormous smile. "Stede," he breathed, smiling at him. He'd been in practice with Stede, co-captains of Revenge Therapies. He'd been Ed's best friend ever since they met 3 years ago, and Ed had been utterly in love with him every minute of the last 3 years. "Evening, Ed," Stede beamed, and his big sweet smile flashing the hidden dimple. Ed already was in love with him, but when Stede pulled out a pizza from Manges, Ed could have cried. "Oh fuck, I love you," Ed whined. He could do that. Could say those words to Stede in context like this of jest, as if it wasn't the fucking absolute truth. "How did you know?" Stede slid into one of the chairs in Ed's office, setting the pizza down on the table, pushing the tissues out of the way. He opened the box and picked up a perfect slice of meatball and mushroom. Stede knew every bit of Ed's idiosyncrasies, from his odd pizza topping preferences to how he hated clipping his toenails. "So," Stede took his own slice, and being absolutely gorgeous, sitting with perfect posture as he held a slice that was all but dripping with toppings and cheese. "I knew that you missed lunch this afternoon. I tried to slip you a banana, but you didn't eat it." After Janice made all those fucking comments about how sexual I eat bananas, she got into my fucking head, Ed interrupted before taking a big bite of his slice, letting the perfect flavours explode across his tongue. She makes me want to fillet a banana just out of spite, Stede said so primly, and Ed couldn't help but giggle at the gorgeous blonde's very prim and proper pronunciation of fillet. And I know that if RM is on your schedule, you're going to be frustrated and tired. So, pizza. He smiled up at Ed. If you like, we can go to my office and pull out Mario Kart. Fuck yes, Ed popped up, grabbing the box of pizza and shooing a laughing Stede into his office. He fucking loved Stede's office. It was one of Ed's favourite places in the world. Stede not only had Mario Kart, but any number of fidget-worthy toys that stimulated Ed's ADHD, and any number of random toys that Ed loved. Ed's office was a soothing, calming place, a little too beige, honestly, but neutral. Stede's office was soothing. It felt comfortable in a way that Ed could never quantify. He wondered if it was just because he was surrounded by such Stedeness. Ed set the pizza on the desk, and Stede ducked behind to reach into a drawer. He drew out honest-to-God plates and cloth napkins. It's just pizza, Stede. Are you saying you're not worth some care and kindness, Ed? Stede asked archly, and Ed knew damn well not to fight that fight with him. Stede was ferocious if he thought Ed wasn't taking care of himself, physically or emotionally. It's your dishes, he replied with a feigned shrug and turned his attention to the various toys. Stede did a lot of play therapy, and so he incorporated a lot of toys. He would have them for a few months and then donate them on and replace them with new fun toys, and Ed fucking loved playing with them. He pulled out a new dino, prancing it on the desk. New dinos, huh? He looked up at Stede. Does this mean you're done fucking hiding them in my office and shit? Stede's smile was evil as he sipped at his ever-present water bottle. Oh, I didn't say that. I swear to God, I have no idea how you fucking managed to get it into the fucking hole of the toilet in my private fucking bathroom. That had caused him to scream and jump backwards, nearly crashing into the door. In his defense, who was expecting a fucking T-Rex in their toilet? Stede's laughter was musical and sweet. I think you know how. His eyes twinkled as he sprawled more comfortably in his own seat. Oh, do you want a drink? He snuck into his disguised fridge and got out Ed's favourite soda before Ed even responded. Ed fucking loved these little intimacies, desperately wanting them to mean something. He knew that they didn't. 3 years of sharing office space and friendship had built the most solid fucking relationship of Ed's life, but it was one that was carefully tucked away in a space reserved for friendship. And that was enough, really. It was. Most days, Ed even managed to convince himself of that. Some days it was hard not to imagine that care and concern coming with soft kisses and warm exchanged glances. So, I saw you're marked as out of office next Thursday and Friday. How dare you abandon me? Stede said so dramatically that Ed smirked, throwing himself back with a wrist to his forehead. I am abandoned. I shall have to have only Lucius for company, and he may have to work a whole 8 hours that day. Ed laughed. No, it's a conference type thing. Specifically, it was a conference for Ed's other profession. He was a pro-dom, though he didn't put that skill set on his business card. He'd been excited to learn one of the largest fetish cons was being held in the town just barely an hour away, especially since he had been approached as a speaker. He replied to Steve, presenting a panel there. He'd found a lot of the skills he'd learnt as a dom, putting himself through school, applied equally well in therapy. There were quite a few well-known names booked in to talk about everything ranging from Kink Aware Therapy to tools of radical sexual acceptance and just about everything in between. He'd been a proud member of the Community Academic Consortium for Research on Alternative Sexualities, or CARAS, since who the fuck ever said all of that out loud, for years. It was a bit like his second home, and having a chance to spend time not only learning and educating, but among like-minded people was too good to pass up. He'd found solace in the scene at times, especially when he was heartsick over Stede. Oh, how lovely, Stede smiled at him, hardly reacting to his slightly awkward deflection. The office will be so quiet and boring without you. Who will ask me what I've been reading? He batted his long eyelashes so fucking sweetly, and Ed had no defences against it. "And what is it you've been reading, Stede?" Ed asked with a laugh, settling in for Stede's annoyed and over-the-top retelling of some classic fiction he'd read recently. He'd listen to Stede read a phone book and feel it relax him. He was absolutely, hopelessly, madly in love with Stede Bonnet, and he absolutely had no chance with him, which was why he was looking forward to a week away, where he'd maybe find a friend to work out some of his personal kinks. Perhaps somewhere in the feel of leather and the sound of someone's breathy cries, he'd forget about the one thing he couldn't have. Ed was used to chaos at any number of professional trade conventions, but there was something unique about one geared towards embracing kink play and all of its many aspects. It didn't matter how you identified or what your preferences were, as long as you were a good fucking person, you were welcome in the community. The people that milled around him were just living their own lives, proudly happy of what they enjoyed and abashedly unashamed about showing it. From people in full leather daddy outfits to business attire to people wearing little more than corsets and skirts, there was no dress code or expectations except that people respect one another. "Glad to see you made it, Blackbeard," a jovial voice greeted him, warned him, and then a hand slapped him dead in the centre of his back. "I knew you'd come once you saw we were able to partner with Karis." Spanish Jackie, who was not Spanish at all, was an imposing black woman with a smile as fierce as any predatory cat's. She was wearing a red dress that clung to a hip that was cocked flirtatiously in his direction. She stood on the board of Chamber Con since the beginning. Fuck, she'd practically put it together from the start. He couldn't help but offer a grin back and accept another slap on his back as he slid the presenter badge around his neck. "And miss out on seeing how many new husbands you'll snag out of this one," he teased lightly. "Plus, you got me a free room and room service. You're gonna live to regret that one." "Fuck, anything that gets you here. We've set up all the continuing education classes down in the far hall. Everything else is upstairs in the ballrooms." Jackie reached around him to snag a map. "If you want to arrange a play party, you can see Lars. He's locked in those rooms. Or do you want a private dungeon space?" "Private would be nice," he said slowly, and flicked his eyes around the hall. He wasn't after anything permanent, but a weekend with someone willing to indulge him, that would work out some frustrations. Jackie handed him a few more things before he managed to extract himself from the aura of charisma that followed the woman everywhere. No wonder she had so many husbands. She was like the Pied Piper. He only escaped because he was a little too gay to be attracted to a woman. If he was bisexual, Ed probably would have been one of her numerous conquests. He grinned as he took a good look at how everything was arranged so he'd remember it for tomorrow. The main floor was set up so that if people wandered off the streets, they wouldn't be immediately hit with the idea that there was a BDSM convention in town, probably at the request of the hotel. There were discreet signs and the language was kept appropriate to a casual glance. The hallway that he followed had a banner for Karis right above it, as well as a mounted sign giving the names and times of each panel. It was all completely normal for any other trade convention he'd been at. Even the names of the panels were tamed down. Aftercare, the calm after the storm. Deep pressure therapy, wellness and kink. Exploring the world of spanking. Well, maybe not that last one, he thought with a grin, and made a note to check that one out just on principle. He took a quick picture of the easel so he'd have a good idea of what the next day had in store before making his way up to the promised bedroom. He wasn't far from home, but he liked the idea of staying here if he found someone. He was past the age where he wanted to take a complete stranger home. The room was a suite, complete with a king-size bed with a little sitting area and desk that he could work at. It was more than enough room to either keep to himself or bring someone back later. He eyed the minibar with interest and the plethora of stocked treats that he knew would not survive his stay. At least he'd be able to keep his strength up. He unpacked in the same way he always did. He tossed his luggage on a rack and unzipped it so that he could easily dig through what he wanted. He went to pull his laptop out of his bag, only to be faced with a dinosaur snarling up at him, holding a piece of paper taped between its claws. "You're going to be dynamite, Stede." Lunatic. Ed laughed and pulled it out to take a picture and send it to Stede to prove he'd gotten it. He left it standing ferociously with its little sign right next to the clock beside the bed. Good. Gary's cheering for you. Gary? You mean you travelled with him all the way to that conference, took him up to your hotel room, and never bothered to ask his name? Ed snorted. He'd taken plenty of guys up to playrooms and never asked their names back in his more promiscuous days. These days it was harder because he always wanted them to have one specific name. He replied, "How remiss of me." Ed looked at the door where he'd left his shoes. He thought about going down to the reception cocktail bullshit, looking for a playmate for a few hours. It wouldn't have been hard to find one, and it would have blown off a bit of stress before bed. He'd already had a few texts from people coming that were interested in getting together, but then his phone dinged again with another message from Stede. Ed ended up texting nonsense with Steve for another hour until bed instead. He felt like he'd made the right choice. Ed had opted for wearing comfort over fetish since he'd be presenting in the afternoon. That meant a pair of supple leather pants that hugged a bit high on his waist, a clean black V-neck t-shirt that showed off the spread wings of his hawk tattoo, and a set of polished leather boots complete with silver chains looped over the top. He'd whimsically added a black cravat that Stede had loaned him and insisted he keep to hang down in front of his shirt. After all, he was a fucking professional, right? Add some dramatic eyeliner sharp enough to kill a man and throw his hair up in a messy bun complete with slut strands, and Ed was ready for anything. "You know how I know this place is run by sadists?" he growled into his coffee. "Because who the fuck starts this shit at 7:30 in the fucking morning?" "At least there's free coffee," Fang pointed out, the man's optimism undulled by the absolute bonkers hour. "Or free sugar with a splash of coffee the way you're piling it on," he grinned to show he was teasing. He'd been nearly crushed in the man's bear hug when he'd come down for breakfast, not that he minded. Fang gave the best damn hugs, and not too many people seemed to realise that Ed did enjoy hugs. They'd set themselves up at a table to chat and catch up over breakfast, and Ed had made sure to pick a two-seater. It gave him an excuse to be less than approachable at a time of day that should have been reserved for birds and masochists. And of course, Stede. "Did you hear about the 12-inch dog?" "Don't. It's too early." "It was a foot long." "Get it? A foot long." "Mate, oh my god, are you serious?" "Hush, I'm hilarious according to my 6-year-old clients." "What are you grinning at?" Fang asked as Ed stared down at the absolutely awful joke that Stede felt impelled to start his morning with. "Just my best friend, he's being a dork," Ed responded easily and then repeated the joke just to hear Fang's amused snort. "This the one you work with? Steve?" "Stede," he corrected and stretched his legs out. "Yeah, he's doing really well. You'd like him, works with kids mostly." Fang worked with kids as well as a special needs educator and para. He'd often incorporated his rescue animals into his work. Granted, he also quite happily would pass on his rescues and fosters to other people to use in therapy. Knowing Fang was like a countdown until you had a pet. Ed wasn't sure when he began to talk about Stede, but it was like a floodgate releasing a torrent of information that he couldn't stop. Fang smiled at him over his paper coffee cup, a little smile peering through the white curl of his beard and an expression of amusement, which didn't really encourage Ed to stop, as he talked about Stede's work at Revenge Therapies and the bonkers porcelain tea set that had replaced the paper cups they normally use there. "Sounds like you like him," Fang murmured, while Ed began to clear away their breakfast. "Not hiding it, mate. We hang out every weekend, fuck, even most days after work." He deflected with a shrug of his shoulder. "He's kind of quirky, but I like it." "I see," Fang hummed softly, and Ed shot him a look. The man's expression. He didn't press. didn't offer anything else, just sort of waiting quality that made Ed want to fidget. It's not like that. We're just friends and peers. He finally said the words that he repeated frequently to himself. Friends and peers, even if he was in love with a man. What time is your talk? Noon. No idea why the fuck I got up this early. Nervous? Nah, I can give a talk. I can do anything. I know you can. Star eyes emoji. That doesn't prevent me from wishing you luck. Ed spent the morning going around the con and doing his best not to feel like grinning like an idiot just because Stede had taken time to wish him luck. He might have spent the morning texting back and forth with Stede, except the man went silent afterwards. He probably had clients, and Stede always gave them his full attention, rightfully so. Ed kept an eye on the clock, hoping that he'd get text close to the hour when Stede was between clients. Funny, Ed had never missed being at work until Stede had arrived in his life. Now he wished he were in the office waiting for a break between clients where he and Stede could chat about their day. He checked out what was on the docket and managed to stop into 2 of the different demos. The first one, a class about bondage ties, was interesting since it was being put on by Mary and Anne. They ran the class with little teasing barbs and comments that were just shy of too much, as Anne did her best to flirt with their volunteer and Mary gave her smouldering looks that promised revenge. Honestly, for them, it was nearly chaste. The other class only made him crinkle his nose as he meandered into the single tail whipping demo that made him regretfully think of Jack. He wasn't sure how the idiot had managed to go years before he'd been banned from events like this, but at least some people were displaying a healthy respect for boundaries and an understanding of basic fucking consent. By the time he was ready for his panel, Ed felt relaxed and even eager. He'd selected a topic that he felt passionate about and had jotted down a handful of notes on cards. He'd long since stopped trying to pre-write everything he wanted to say. He was better at ad-libbing while touching on key points. The room wasn't overly crowded, but it was full enough that he felt flattered as he stepped out in front of the room with a smile and a scattering of applause. Blackbeard was a well-known name in the scene, and he was sure quite a few people had come anticipating the sort of shows he'd done in the past. Well, joke was on them. They'd get an earful of education instead. Looks like we've got quite a crowd, huh? He murmured into the microphone and cast an appraising eye around the room. Now, you'll be happy to know that you've stumbled into Kink Aware Therapy. How do we engage geographic and associated cultural diversity? Fuck, that's a mouthful, isn't it? Just a lot of damn words to say something important. There was a scattering of laughter around the room, and he flashed an easy smile before stepping up onto a chair and dropping down to sit on the table behind him. He grinned a little wider when he saw Fang near the back, because of course Fang would make time to stop in on his panel. There's one overarching point that I will begin with, and I hope that all of you will take to heart, and that's the same lesson you can get if you go up to the size Queens Unite demo. One size does not fit all. A Kink Aware therapist needs to understand the nuances about more than just a scene, but the cultures and even geographic locations can require adjustment and empathy. So, if you're a therapist or seeking therapy, it's important to understand just what I mean when I say that. Kink Aware Therapy was one of the things that he proudly advertised that he specialised in. He'd been on the receiving end of therapy that didn't understand a damn thing about his kinks, that viewed his relationships as problematic, if not outright abusive, because of their ignorance. If he hadn't been his own advocate, he was pretty sure those particular therapists would have done a lot to fuck up his view of healthy sex. Now he was part of the solution, helping to educate with just enough humour to keep people engaged. He began talking about various cultural beliefs and inhibitions that might require adjustment to someone's approach in working as a therapist. He outlined even such small things as the difference of 100 miles could be incredibly diverse. It ranged out into different countries and belief systems, though he gave a few comments about the theological class for people wanting to explore that aspect. Ed had never really been one for the whole God thing. I'm sure by now most of you have heard cause hurt, not harm, when discussing some aspects of BDSM. It can be difficult to reconcile that thought if you keep yourself away from the community. He tipped his head a little thoughtfully. But bearing that in mind, you have to remember that you are a voice of reason. There are some things that are harmful, even if a client may believe there's something they enjoy or deserve. You need to adjust your baseline for a healthy relationship for those fetishes and what an unhealthy one may look like. Remember that power dynamics are a key component to those relationships, even power imbalances. Ed was still chatting happily away about the implications of power imbalances when he realised that he must be going fucking insane, because at the back of the room at the goddamn BDSM convention, Stede Bonnet was beaming at him with his hands clutching a little welcome packet and dressed in a pale powder blue suit. He tried to will the insane vision away, but it remained right there, brimming with sunshine and excitement. What the fuck? Ed breathed the words out and then froze as he heard his own voice on the microphone spilling around the room. Right, yeah, power imbalances in the bedroom dynamic. His brain was slamming to a halt. Whistles and alarms were whooping wildly because there was no way in fuck Stede was standing at the back of the room mouthing language. Why the hell was Stede here? And with a little admission pass hanging off his neck in front of the white button-up shirt, his same little he-him pin on his lanyard. As he got his talk back on track, Stede graced him with a dorky double thumbs up and found a seat to watch. His expression was pleased, even as Ed did his best not to stammer or just start screaming. Screaming sounded like a good idea. A great idea, in fact, because he had no idea what the hell was going on. Perhaps he was in a dream. He reflexively glanced down to make sure he wasn't naked, because he always was naked in dreams like this. Nope, pants and everything. Fuck. Ed sort of coasted to the last of the talk and thanked fuck he'd given it so many times he could do that, because he was having a full-scale babbling breakdown of epic proportions as he tried to imagine all the ways Stede might be here. The most likely was that Stede had decided to be supportive, which was the most Stede thing to do. That considerate motherfucker. But what had he seen? Had he even looked at the schedule of events? Fuck. Would he notice that Ed's picture on the back came with a blurb about his skills with caning, restraints, and various forms of impact play? It wasn't that Ed was embarrassed about his sexual preferences. He really wasn't. In fact, he'd be damned if he let anyone make him feel bad about what he enjoyed in the bedroom. It was just that Stede was so fucking wholesome and innocent. Their PA, Lucius, was the king of lewd and suggestive comments, which repeatedly went over the man's head. Stede had spent years married to a woman and not realised he was gay. Dumping him into a fetish convention was the equivalent of putting a toddler on American Gladiators. Ed managed to navigate the question portion, giving advice about how to find a Kink Aware therapist, even managing a joke that his books were full for the moment. He may have cut it short out of fear that someone would bring up something about his other skills, something that would inadvertently out him to Stede. When he finished, he hopped down from the table and made a beeline to the blonde. Gosh, that was fascinating. Stede greeted him with a little bounce on his heels, looking every inch the professional in his well-tailored suit. The only nod to being casual was the fact that he had no tie and the first button was undone, showing off his Adam's apple that Ed had fantasized a great deal about licking. I'm sorry to throw you for a loop there. I meant to arrive before your talk, but the traffic was just awful. Yeah, mate, I didn't realise you were coming to this too. Ed did his best to sound normal, perfectly normal. There was the slightest chance that Stede did know what sort of event this was, and wouldn't that be fascinating? You should have told me. Oh, I hadn't meant to at first, but apparently there was a water break and the office closed today. I thought it'd be a fun surprise. Stede's nose crinkled in an adorable smile. Lucius was quite encouraging. He even secured tickets for me for the event. So, Stede spread his arms. Here I am. What a fascinating convention. Yep, very fascinating. Ed gave his head a few jerky nods as his mind was still trying to play catch-up. So, yeah, you look around? Goodness, no, I just got admission and said I was interested in your talk. Stede lifted a glossy brochure up that had Karis written across the top. They gave me this and a folder full of information about the continuing education credits. Gosh, they have the most fascinating titles. I thought you might enjoy company. Stede had bought admission to a fetish convention and gotten a folder loaded with information about professional credits and educational talks, and he had somehow missed the entire back portion of the folder that had an artful black and white of a person suspended from ropes and blindfolded. Ed wasn't sure if he wanted to laugh or cry. Both were an option, but he settled on a sort of choked laugh when he realised Stede hadn't had his brain turned into an embarrassed puddle of goo by seeing something he shouldn't have. I've been a bit too much, haven't I? Stede faltered, and his hazel eyes flickered. I should have texted at the very least. I've probably disrupted your schedule. No, mate, it's fine. Ed reassured him immediately, reaching up to tuck a strand of his loose hair behind an ear. And yeah, they have a lot of classes here. Mostly it's about, intimacy though, so not a great deal you might find interesting. Edward, I'm well aware of intimacy. I was married with 2 children, Stede said primly and shot him a look. And teenagers are teenagers, and I'm sure it won't be wasted time. Oh, well, if you're sure. Ed should have sent him home. He should have abandoned this fucking ship because he knew for a fact that 2 floors above him there were fisting demos running and the wrong sort of talks about CBT for a therapist to listen to. Time spent with you is never wasted, Stede offered with a smile, and Ed knew it was just meant in a friendly way, but it still made him feel impossibly fond of the man. Now, shall we take a look at some of these seminars? No, Ed blurted out, and then bit a lip, trying to sound more casual. No, actually I'm starving. You want to go get lunch? Stede visibly brightened. Oh, yes, it was something someone mentioned about cake eating. Oh, Jesus, tap dancing, Christ save me. No, I was thinking more like sushi? It was Stede's greatest edible weakness. Oh, sounds fab. I looked up a lovely place just in case. What time do we need to be back for afternoon sessions? Ed squirmed. There's nothing really on this afternoon. Nonsense. This says the next round starts at 3. Stede started to open his brochure. What kind of things? Ed tried not to panic. Stede, he cajoled. You know that if you start debating, we won't get to lunch. Let's go. Thankfully, Stede seemed to cave at that, although he playfully rolled his eyes. All right, let's get going. Shall we take your car? Mine has my luggage in it still. I hadn't gotten a chance to check in. That was unlike Stede. Why? Ed asked, even as he made his way to his jeep. Stede swung up into the passenger's side. I was in a hurry. I didn't want to miss your talk. Stede reached forward, patting the passenger's side visor fondly and pulling a small side smile from Ed. Stede had read that Jeep Cherokees had hidden animals and had hunted through Ed's vehicle looking for one. When Stede had looked it up and read that Ed's Cherokee might have a T-Rex or Bigfoot, he had nearly dismantled Ed's ride looking for one. Finally, Ed had bought a decal of Bigfoot, and Stede had been overjoyed finding it on the passenger's visor. He still patted him fondly when he rode with Ed. God, Ed was so in fucking love with this man. I did enjoy your talk, Stede continued, and Ed bit his lip. On the one hand, he wanted feedback from Stede. The man was smart and clever, if sometimes a bit naive. On the other, he didn't want Stede to look too closely at anything at this convention. I'm glad, he said as blandly as he could. Apparently that was enough to encourage Stede to keep going. Oh yes, I think that we don't tell people often enough that no matter what the reason, if your therapist doesn't seem to get you, you can always leave. And your arguments about cultural diversity and awareness were exactly on point. You always do so well speaking, Ed. You're informative and casual and fun. I imagine everyone loved you. Stede was always full of sweet words that warmed Ed to the core. He'd think Stede meant something affectionate from it if he didn't know Stede was dumping positive regard on him and that Ed's praise kink was taking it the very wrong way. He hadn't really had a praise kink till Stede. Rather than letting his feelings become too obvious, Ed leaned close. Hey, did you know that dogs can't run an MRI machine? Stede was already giggling. No, Edward, no. But cats can. He winked. Stede's laughter echoed throughout the car, and Ed felt an odd pride. That was terrible. I loved it. His eyes twinkled. Of course, you can't tell dad jokes if you don't have any kids, Edward. That makes you a faux pas. Ed groaned to hide his grin. Well done, that was horrible. Ed praised and Stede preened. Oh, this is the sushi place he carefully pulled into the parking stall. You have to be careful around sushi though. It can be a little fishy. Stede teased with a sly look. They both laughed far harder than the joke warranted, but it felt good. God, we're going to get thrown out before we even order. Ed shook his head, but he was grinning. Lunch with Stede was a delight as usual. They chatted about any nonsense that had occurred to either of them, bouncing from Stede's delightful description of some beautiful moth he'd seen, discussing the new DBT group Olawande one of the junior partners wanted to run, and chattering good-naturedly about a book they'd both read. It was enough to make Ed almost forget that he had to somehow shield this maniac from the variety of kink demos happening at the fucking hotel. So, what shall we attend this afternoon? I admit I hadn't looked at any of the materials. I was in a bit of a rush, Stede admitted with a small smile. Well, there's some Kara sessions this afternoon. Ed reached out, snatching the program from Stede quickly, looking through it himself. Fuck, please let there be something not terrifying. His eyes fell on talks like Pet Play Introduction and The Power of Promiscuity and Kickstarting a Kink Non-Profit. Stede apparently managed to glance something upside down. Did I see something about CBT? I'm always keen to brush up. Ed wanted to spit out the drink he wasn't drinking. Fuck me, how do I say wrong CBT? I don't think Stede needs to see cock and ball torture when he's expecting cognitive behavioural therapy. What was that about spanking? We have to go to that. What? Ed felt his eyes go enormous and fought to keep his jaw from literally falling. If Stede was into spanking, giving or receiving, Ed's brain would fucking melt. As an adult and an advocate for children, I'm obligated to go. Someone needs to stand up against spanking. At an intimacy conference of all things, he huffed. You of all people know that spanking is one of the most insidiously harmful decisions a parent can make. It was a rant Stede had gone through more than once with Ed. Actually, what about this one? Soft skills for success in the workplace. He very carefully didn't add the and kink communities part. That sounds like something tailor-made for you. Stede cocked his head and smiled. Oh, that sounds like a good idea. Excellent thinking, Ed. He grabbed for the black folder with the check in it before Ed even realised that it had been laid down. Stede was a pro at paying lunch checks before Ed could get them, and Ed had a lot of practice at telling himself that it didn't mean anything. We should get going before it's too late. I'm excited about this conference. Yeah, me too, Ed lied. Ed had been to all sorts of conferences before. They were always a little bit stressful, but now they all seemed like walks in the park as he walked into the hotel with Stede at his side. He'd sort of been immune to the various outfits people wore, but now he was trying to imagine what Stede might think. At least everything on the first floor was generally acceptable. Even the odder panels weren't going to have full-on nudity in them, so Ed would count that a fucking win. The soft skills workshop turned out to be pretty fucking fascinating, especially discussing similarities between reading body language in the workplace and in the midst of a scene. It was very professional, though a few of the jokes were a bit risque. He would have normally been fully engaged, but he was more busy watching Stede listen to it. He would offer up a small sacrifice to the gods of the oblivious if Stede just didn't question anything. Now, I'm not saying you take a scene into the workplace. I doubt most workplaces would enjoy it if you stopped mid-workday to bend your sub over the desk for the sake of morale, the presenter was saying with a bright wink. Remember, this isn't about introducing sexuality, but the confidence you can experience in a dungeon setting into managing others. Ed did not fucking look at Stede at the comment about bending a sub over a desk. If he followed that train of thought, he'd be jumping off at a station that he imagined Stede in one of his impeccable outfits bent over a desk. And if he imagined that, he might as well kiss his brain cells goodbye. They managed to get through the whole thing, with Stede pulling out a little notebook and carefully writing down things that he wanted to remember. Ed dearly wanted to know what those things were, but he kept his mouth shut as they got to the last portion of the panel. Now, I want to partner people up and do a bit of role play. Clothes stay on for the role play. There was a scattering of laughter, and Ed saw Stede turn a bit pink. You can try whatever you think would fit your style best, but I want you to really reach and think about how this would work in the real world. Oh, roleplay sounds fun. Stede flashed him a bright smile that Ed tried to return. He hoped it looked normal. Be my partner? I wish, Ed thought, but what he said was simply, course, what did you want to try? I love the part about utilising praise in constructive criticism. Stede pointed down at his notebook. We should try that. I can imagine that it'll be very helpful with some of your clients. And in being a little firmer with people for you, you got to stop letting people push you around, mate. It was a long-standing argument between them. Of course, Stede would go for the praise angle, which honestly was probably the easiest thing he could have picked. The rest of the room was pairing up, or forming groups while he swung his chair around to face Stede. Ed gave a dramatic clearing of his throat and put on his best Lucius wine. I know I said I'd file that for you, but you can't expect me to do it just an hour before quitting time. He grinned as Stede crinkled up his nose. You know I have that thing. Really, Edward? Stede huffed out and rolled his eyes before drawing in a breath. Stede was awful at telling Lucius no at the best of times, and Ed was going to do his best bratty impression, while ignoring everything that it did to him when Stede full-named him. I know you must be terribly busy. You are such a hard worker. You've done so well for me these past few days. Surely you could make time for this. Nah, I can do it tomorrow. Ed shrugged and affected a bored look. Or really, probably be easier if you just did it, right? I mean, what if I fuck it up? Just bollocks the whole thing. Stede let out a delightful scoffing sound at the wheedling tone Ed put into his tone before responding. It would be easier if I did that, but I think you want to do this for me. I've seen how well you take care of things. I've seen how hard you work for me, and you must realise how much I appreciate it, how grateful I am for you. Stede's voice pitched a bit softer, his words warm, and fuck. Ed wanted to squirm a bit as he leaned forward earnestly. Well, yeah, I guess so, but I don't have any time right now. I think you have time, Edward. I think you want to make time for this. Imagine how fulfilling it would be, how much better both our days would be. Don't you want to be fulfilled? Don't you want to do your job for me? Stede murmured, and then there was just something about the way he talked that made Ed suck in a breath. Edward, you're going to file those forms for me, aren't you? You want to be so good at your job, so good for me. Isn't that right? What the fucking shit? Ed froze as Stede leaned forward and his hazel eyes were fixed on Ed's with an expression of fond expectation. It teased at an old memory, the cadence of those words, making his reaction flush his cheeks. Edward, answer me. Stede touched his chin with a finger and he nearly jumped out of his skin. Are you going to do your job? Are you going to make me happy? Yes. Ed stammered the answer because fucking shit hell, Ed wasn't sure what else he was supposed to say. Too much blood was flowing away from his brain. I knew you would. There's nothing you can't do. Stede smiled at him, a sunny expression that made Ed's stomach give a small flip-flop. And when you're done with that, you're going to do callbacks. Your voice is so lovely, anyone would be privileged to hear you talk to them. Yeah, callbacks. He shifted as Stede's expression never really wavered. He looked so pleased with himself. Thank you. I'm so very grateful for you. How hard you're willing to work for me. You are a treasure. Ed tried not to read into those words because he'd heard Stede say shit like that before, just not in a row and not with his eyes refusing to let Ed's go. He wanted to hear Stede talk more about how good he was, how hard he worked. Fuck. Nope. Abort. He was not. Good boy. Show me how well you listen now. And whatever mind Ed had leaked a little out of his head at the soft praise, and he was absolutely not thinking of dropping down to his knees to show Stede what a good boy he could be. He just stared at the other man with his mouth partially open as he watched, the hazel eyes expectant. Was he imagining they were expectant? Maybe he was. Stede burst out in a little giggle, and the moment broke as quickly as it started. He crinkled his nose as Ed let out a forced weak laugh that he hoped to fuck sounded casual. Not like the sound of Stede saying good boy had altered some chemical in his brain that might not go back to normal. "Oh, that was fun," Stede enthused and waved a hand at Ed. "Okay, your turn. I'll be one of your clients." Ed nodded his head and agreed, because at that point Stede could have asked him anything and he probably would have agreed to it. Stede was an absolute menace, and Ed was keenly aware that having him at this event might be even weirder than he thought. They finished up the class with no more appearances of Stede praising him and giving him veiled commands, which was both disappointing and relieved him. It wasn't like he'd act on the urges, but that had done something for him. It made him think about years ago when he'd stumbled across an odd video series that had made him really question how the power balances worked in the community. The old and outdated idea that allowing someone to be submissive made them soft and lesser. "Right. Oh, there were so many classes," Stede announced, as they left the room and he found one of the posters set on an easel. "Ah, yeah, there always are." Ed glanced at the board, which was set up to give information, but not using some of the more obvious terms. He still didn't want Stede to look at it too closely. "So I was thinking we can probably catch death of the queer community. That seems relevant," Ed pointed out, and Stede frowned a little bit. "That doesn't sound very terribly pleasant. What about doing something just for fun?" He ran down the list and Ed fumbled to get his phone out. "Here, I got shit on my phone. Probably easier for you to read without your reading glasses," he explained when he spotted a few of the classes that were obviously not coded enough. He did not need Stede to ask about fisting. Please, if there were any kind of goddess, do not let Stede notice the fisting. "Okay, we can hit up the sex workers panel. I'm pretty interested in that. Says here it covers a lot of topics." "CBT!" Stede exclaimed happily and really fucking loudly, which caused a few people to glance over at him. God, of course Stede would remember that class name and bring it up again. "We need to go to the CBT one. It's always good to stay abreast of changes." "Giving or receiving?" someone said with a lascivious wink as they sauntered past, because of course Stede was loud enough to be overheard. "Oh, I've done both. I'm very good as a provider, if I may say so myself." Ed tried not to choke as the man's grin widened with interest. So Ed turned around to glare at him with every fucking bit of "don't even think about it" set in his face. "Stede, mate, no, let's do the sex workers talk. That starts in 20. Ed temporised as he turned back to see Stede giving him an odd look. "Come on, it'll be great. And it won't involve me chasing men away from you because they think you'll smack their twigs and berries around," he thought ruefully, still aware the guy who had asked was giving Stede an interested look. He remembered Stede once telling him a story about how he had nearly had to put a backpack leash on Lewis as a child because the kid would move a mile a minute. He laughed his ass off at the time, especially the stories of Stede looking away for a second and the toddler always finding something he shouldn't get into. He now desperately wished he could put a leash and collar on Stede, and not just because it would be hot as hell. Do not fucking visualise it, fuck, but because the man was wide-eyed and eager to see everything. The sex workers panel had been fascinating, discussing the stigma of sex work, but also ways to make it accessible and safe, all things that Ed had found interesting. But at the end of it, Ed had looked away from Stede and immediately lost the man. He wasn't sure how it had happened. He'd just seen someone he knew and waved to her one moment, and the next Stede was gone. By the time he located Stede, he was animatedly talking to one of the volunteers about the leather shorts he was wearing. "I just think leather isn't terribly breathable. Do you have them lined with anything?" Stede inquired to a confused twink. My underwear, I guess. It's not meant to be breathable. It looks good." The man twisted around to show off his legs. "If you've got the legs for them, and I think you do," he winked. "Fuck, Stede, do not just wander off," Ed greeted him as Stede pursed his lips thoughtfully at the leather shorts. "And why are you asking about his shorts?" "Well, you're very cool with your leather, but I don't know whether I could pull off the pants. Do you think I'd look good in leather shorts?" Stede asked with a furrowed brow, and Ed's brain packed up to abandon him to that image. Stede in clinging leather shorts, his long and muscular legs exposed and put on display, his ass cupped in clinging leather. He knew Stede had great legs. It wasn't like it was a secret, but he tended to always wear pants. Now Ed's mind was going to places that caused him to bite his lip. I am a bad, bad man, he thought, and sucked in a deep breath. Yeah, sure, I bet you would. Understatement. Do you want to go check out another panel? Maybe we can go to a Q&A? They have them down in the vendors hall, the very helpful twink said, and Stede's eyes immediately lit up. Just find the leather stallion booth. Oh, do they make horse saddles too? If there's a god, you can take me now, Ed thought, as Stede still looked interested, because it was fashion, and fashion always interested Stede. Actually, mate, should probably get you checked into the hotel. Ed grasped at another way for Stede to be kept away from vendors hall. The last time he'd gone in, someone had been demoing a St. Andrew's cross, and his mental health would not survive Stede interacting with a St. Andrew's cross in any capacity. Get your luggage from your car? Oh gosh, that's right, I should, shouldn't I? Stede caved so Ed could let out a breath of relief. Perfect. Checking in would take some time, and he'd come up with more places that Stede could safely navigate through. Great, fantastic. Let's go get you all checked in. And if everything was played right, perhaps he could keep Stede away from everyone indefinitely. Unfortunately, whatever higher power let this distract from the leather was no longer with him. I'm terribly sorry, the front desk said. I'm afraid we're all booked up this weekend, due to the convention and all. There's not a single room? Stede asked, eyes enormous. I'm sure there's some last-minute cancellation or something. The man, Abshir, by his name tag, frowned. I'm so sorry, Mr. Bonnet. I can call some of our sister hotels about some availability. How far away? The nearest is about 40 minutes. 40 human minutes? Stede exclaimed. Ed knew exactly that tone, the way that Stede is going to escalate. At best, it'll be tears. At worst, he'll demand to see a manager. In an attempt to head off Stede's crazy moment, Ed put a hand lightly on his shoulder, ignoring the play of Stede's muscles. Hey, Stede. He smiled a bit when Stede turned to meet his eyes. It'll be okay, mate. It's not my place to suggest, Abshir interjected softly, but if there is someone closer you could stay with? Stede turned to Ed fully and, oh no. Oh, fuck no. Stede's big pleading eyes were impossible to resist. Ed, could I stay with you? His big hazel eyes fixed on Ed and made him fucking stupid and weak at the knees. I don't know, I just have the one bed. We can certainly see about arranging a fold-away, Abshir interjected smoothly. Fuck. He'd known from the instant he heard there were no rooms, really. He'd known where it would go. Yeah, he said, and was rewarded with Stede's bright smile in response. You can stay in mine. Fab. I promise I don't take up too much space, Stede added with a grin. Mate, I know you too fucking well. You take up all the closet space, he countered fondly. You sure we can get a rollaway or cot or something? He added to Abshir. I will see to it personally, Abshir promised. Would you like an extra key card, Mr. Teach? He agreed, and soon he was following Stede out to his car with a cart. It could be a weekend trip, but Stede was a notorious overpacker. Ed was surprised to see that there was only 3 bags, 2 enormous and 1 slightly smaller. What the hell needs 3 bags, Stede? I like having options, Stede said primly, as he lifted the largest into the cart, and Ed intentionally ignored his bulging biceps. He was too busy worrying about this. He had been given a room as a speaker, but the suite that had been so palatial when he left it this morning was seeming a lot smaller now. At least there was a little sitting area where he could put the rollaway and the sort of half partition that would let Ed pretend Stede wasn't in his room. Oh, Stede gave a soft smile at the room. This is surprisingly nice. Yeah, there's room for a rollaway over here in the sitting area, Ed said, easing himself down onto the couch. His knee was burning after a day at a con. Are you going to be okay on it? The blonde shrugged. I'll see. Isn't half the fun of a convention ending up in someone else's room? Ed sputtered at that, suddenly unable to breathe because what the fuck did he just say? Stede shot him a look and his hazel eyes were glittering as he laughed at Ed. I'm teasing. He flopped onto the couch, laughing, as Ed tried to get control over himself. For a second, he was sucked into thinking about Stede finding someone like that twink in the leather shorts and going up to their room for a one-night stand, and it made Ed thirsty, yeah, but also fucking furious. Like, how dare they? What the fuck would that twink have that Stede wanted? What did he have that Ed didn't? Edwin. Stede's hand captured his hand on the back of the small couch. I'm teasing. I wouldn't go off with a stranger. His smile was soft and sweet. Ed squeezed the hand once, not knowing what to say, but Stede's sweet smile remained. I know how much you worry about my safety. Sure. Safety. Anyway, have you given any thought to dinner tonight? Stede continued. That made Ed smile a bit. One of Stede's adorable little quirks was how he researched extensively any place he travelled through or to. You already have some cool hidden gem to share with me, he replied in amusement. Come on, lay it on me. Stede's smile was everything Ed loved, soft and sweet and excited. Fuck, Ed was so gone for this man. You know me too well, Stede replied, and fuck, Ed did. So I found this restaurant that's in a former funeral parlour and it does Korean street food. And it's right next to this other place I'd love to take you. It's a dessert buffet. Oh, fuck yeah. Ed loved the sound of both of those things. Loved the Korean street food. In a funeral parlour? Fucking bizarre. I love it. Stede preened. I thought you would. Shall we change for dinner? Ed mentally considered his luggage. He'd planned mostly for a kink con. Actually, this was going to be awkward since he'd planned to wear a harness tomorrow. Fuck. Oh, I brought that oxblood button down. I love how it looks on you. If you'd like to borrow it, Stede said without any particular inflection. Yeah, I'd love it. Let's get you unpacked. Justify 3 bags to me, Stede, he teased. The smaller bag was filled with Stede's various toiletries, ranging from his hair and skincare routines to a selection of bath bombs. What the hell, Stede? He laughed. Tell me your knee isn't aching after a day on a convention floor, Stede retorted with an eyebrow quirked. And yeah, he was right. Okay, I can see planning to be sore. Stede made a soft sound as he hung up his clothes. Oh, I suppose. I was more thinking of you, to be honest. And didn't that take Ed out at the knees? The casual way Stede thought about taking care of him was so fucking sweet and so fucking devastating. He was saved from trying to come up with a response by Stede finding the shirt and offering it up. Ed was thankful he could duck into the bathroom to get dressed and compose himself. Dinner had been cool as shit. Stede had clearly picked the place because it was something he knew Ed would like. Unique and quirky and a little morbid. The dessert buffet was a fucking revelation. Stede sat with a cup of tea while Ed filled up a plate. You're not getting something? Oh, I'll pick out something in a bit, Stede said negligently. It's really more for you. And fuck, if Ed didn't want to fucking cry about it. Stede did this shit all the time, showing Ed quiet care that kept Ed so fucking stupidly in love with him. Like, Stede wasn't just a fucking smoke show, he was also so fucking nice. Ed lamented again that he couldn't say, Hey, Stede, I'd like to take you on a date and kiss the fuck out of you and rail you into next week, or have you rail me. I'm versatile like that. Stede would be kind when he let Ed down, and then Ed would ruin the best friendship he'd ever had, to say nothing about the fucking business. No, he couldn't have Stede. Sweet, blonde bombshells like Stede were not for old leather doms like Ed. Still, he always had fun with Stede, and by the time they were back to their shared hotel room, Ed was finally feeling some of the stress of the day relax, and he was starting to be sort of glad Stede had showed up. So, of course, the universe had to take that opportunity to shit on him. Stede had waved Ed off at the desk, saying he'd stopped to get the cot sent up. Ed was right on his heels until he got tackled by a brick wall. Teach! Read! He couldn't help the joy that burst from him at seeing his friend. Stede, standing at the desk, glanced back and smiled at Ed, giving him that little wave of his fingers and a grin. Well, there wasn't much trouble he could get into, and the hotel was probably not going to have, someone dressed as a pony being ridden through the lobby, right? I was so fucking glad to see you here, you absolute dick. Mary grinned at him. The shorter woman was solidly built, and Ed's side ached from where she tackled him. I've been trying to catch you since your talk. Ed raised an eyebrow, surprised that Mary had gone. What did you think? Thought it could have used more rope or whips. She winked at him, and Ed laughed. Mary was a dominatrix at heart, and she'd been far more likely to be giving one of those CBT talks Ed had steered Stede away from. Nah, don't do the demos anymore, Ed shrugged. Cane one guy in public, you've caned him all, right? He teased. Sometimes it starts to just get stale is all. I hear that, Mary said with a dry irritation that wasn't quite as pointed at Ed. Speaking of, you see my fucking wife around? Ed's eyebrows went up, so it was like that for them now. Anne and Mary had the weirdest dynamic of anyone he knew. Sometimes they were all over one another and you had to fucking hose them down to keep them as tame as NC-17 in public. Sometimes he half expected to find a knife sticking out of one of their backs. Waved at her earlier, but that's it. She doing any talks? We're sitting in on a poly panel, she grinned lazily. You're looking a little tamed lately, Blackbeard. She followed Ed's gaze to where Stede was talking with Abshire. Have your eyes on something? No, hey! He tried to impress on her the importance. That's Stede, my co-worker? She glanced at Stede and then at Ed, and then to his horror threw back her head and cackled. Oh shit, is this that Stede? The one you're fucking in love with? Keep it fucking down, he hissed, and it only made her laugh harder. Yes, okay, but we're not, he doesn't know it's a kink conference. That pulled Mary to a halt, but based on her maniac grin, it wasn't for long. What? He showed up without looking into it. I told him it was about intimacy, and I'm trying to keep him from the kinkier shit. Well, you just had a major failure, Mary laughed, nodding at where Stede stood near the front desk, talking to fucking Anne, of all people. Anne, as expected, had her waist snatched tight in a corset and her tits almost all the way out, and she was leaning forward to let them nearly spill out. She was wearing a skirt and had a fucking whip wrapped around her waist as a belt. Every inch of her screamed she was looking for a good time, and she put her hand on Stede's bicep flirtatiously. Mary laughed, leaning into Ed. Be funny if she fucks your man tonight. And that was enough to launch Ed across the lobby. Quite the heartbreaker, aren't you, Stede? Anne was leaning in flirtatiously when Ed burst in. Anne! The woman turned to him, grin growing enormous. Teach! She shrieked, laughing before literally jumping up into his arms, wrapping her legs around his waist. Anne was like that, chaotic and affectionate and weird as shit. She gave him a smacking kiss and wrapped her arms around his neck. Still fucking gay then? Gayer than you are, Ed replied with a laugh. Anne dropped from where she was wrapped around him, but still remained a bit too close for most people's comfort. Ed was fairly used to her insanity, though. Heard you doing some panels tomorrow? Oh, did you? Her voice went icy. I had no idea I was doing any more panels. We talked about this months ago when we agreed to sit on the poly panel, darling. Mary responded, knives in her tone. Oh, did we? She replied, words polite but tone bitchy as hell. Yeah, we fucking did, Mary met her, snark for snark. Well, that sounds fab, Stede said with a beam, fully fucking triangulating the pending argument like the practice therapist he was. When is it? We'll have to make sure we attend. Ed would rather have eaten his own fucking face than attended a panel when Anne and Mary were in this mood. They'd fucking kill each other on stage given half a chance, and there was an equal chance they'd drag the audience right in the middle of it because their games had to have some real stakes in them to be fun. We'll have to see, Ed temporised. Wait, are you two are together? Anne's head swiveled between them. Oh, Eddie! Stede beamed. Oh, yes, we're partners. And how long have you been partners, Ed? Anne asked, leaning on Ed's shoulder. Stede looked over at Ed. Oh, gosh, 3 years now? Business partners, Ed interjected. We work together. Anne's smile went sly, and fuck, he caught the little look Anne sent Mary, and he felt terror shoot through his chest. There was something very bad about to happen. He felt like Cassandra, with the premonitions that no one would ever believe. This was going to fucking explode, and he had no idea how to stop it. Well, we should get dinner, Anne purred. I'd love to catch up more with both of you. Well, we just ate, Ed interjected. Yeah, but you can stop in the bar for some cocktails, can't you? Mary added, eyes narrowing. Stede looked at Ed with a small smile and a shrug, as if to say, why not? Ed could think of a lot of reasons why, starting and ending with, these women are fucking crazy. But a reason Stede would buy? Maybe just one, he caved. I'm exhausted and we've got an early morning. The hotel bar opened out onto the street to allow public access, which meant it was probably the tamest fucking spot in the entire hotel. He let himself relax marginally as he all but dragged Stede into a seat underneath the overhang in front of the hotel in the hopes that it would help. Not that it would stop Anne and Mary, because he knew the look in their eyes meant they were ass deep into some new game. "You two boys look like you need a screaming orgasm," Anne greeted them as she returned from the bar, sauntering with a sway of her hips that had at least 3 guys and even more girls looking after her. "What?" Stede squeaked and coloured immediately. Ed glared at Anne like he wanted to light her on fire. "It's a drink," Ed explained as Anne set a pair of drinks down. "Actually a pretty good fucking drink. Really sweet." "Oh, well, that makes sense." Stede scrunched up his nose adorably while Mary straddled a backward-facing chair. "It's so nice to meet friends of Ed's. Have you known him long?" "Ages and ages. We go way back," Mary drawled lazily. "Miss seeing you around the conventions, but I suppose I can see why if you're so busy being partnered up." "I just don't like to travel so much anymore," Ed grumbled, and gave her a look as Anne almost casually crowded Stede's space. "Maybe he'll go to more if I go too. This has been so fun. I didn't realise getting CE credits could be fun. We were in one earlier that I nearly filled a notebook up on." Stede took a sip of his drink while Ed saw Anne's eyes widen in delight. "It really helps with the interpersonal skills." "Oh, the soft skills workshop? I'd have pegged a heartbreaker like you to wanting something harder," Anne pouted, and Stede gave her a near-nervous look while she looped an arm over the back of his chair. "Nah, Blackbeard here likes a bit of soft skill if I remember." Mary's eyes were glittering in delight as Ed tried to decide how much murder he could do before someone stopped him. "I seem to recall you always enjoyed a soft gentleman, isn't that right?" "Motherfucker." Ed tensed his jaw a little bit. "You share one video of one hot guy doing hot soft doming." "What's wrong with that?" Stede frowned a little bit as the tension grew. "I've been told I'm a soft gentleman. It's not a bad thing." He almost pouted. "Yeah, not a bad thing at all, mate," Ed assured him, while doing his best not to think of Stede and the video that was toying at the back of his mind. Fancy a hard gentleman myself," Anne purred while Mary shot her a look, eyes narrowed, while Stede blissfully seemed to let it all go over his head. And it went downhill from there, because Stede was very Stede. He could chatter on about any topic at any time, enthusiastic and charming. That was half the reason Ed had first fallen in love with him. He'd happily stop and talk to anyone, but this time it was talking about the class they'd taken about soft skills. Ed had only meant to have one drink, but as Anne and Mary grew more animated and affectionate with one another, Ed decided the better part of valour was another drink. "Do you want my orgasm?" Stede asked in the midst of the conversation, and Ed's brain stuttered, skidded, and went blank as he stared at the flush-faced Stede. "What?" he croaked. "It's too sweet. Why don't you take it, and I'm going to go grab something else." Stede slid his martini glass over to Ed, because of course that's what he was talking about. "Unless you'd like something else too?" "Nope, nah, love a good screaming orgasm," he managed, while Mary and Anne both stared at him like he'd given them a gift all wrapped up. "Thought you might," Stede beamed at him before standing up, asking if either of the women wanted drinks before going to the bar. "Oh shit, you're down bad, aren't you?" Mary asked with raised eyebrows as Ed attempted to hide his face behind his drink. "I didn't think you could blush." "I am not. Don't know what you're talking about," he grumbled and jabbed a finger at Mary. "Don't involve us in your weird sex games, for fuck's sake." "You know me, Teach, I won't. Annie, though, she has a thing for blondes, don't you, my darling?" She cooed the last words and he sighed. Okay, this would be fine. He'd just have one more drink and get the fuck out of here. He glanced around for Stede and found the blonde standing near the bar, engaged in an animated conversation with a slightly shorter, dark-skinned man. He could see Stede beaming at him, and why the hell was Stede smiling at some guy wearing a silver chest harness and a pair of latex pants? He didn't even think as he scrambled up from the chair to the laughter of the girls and made to interrupt whatever was going on. It wasn't that he was trying to keep Stede from dating. Fuck, Edward had lived through the last relationship Stede had had with a guy that had been infuriatingly smug. No, he was more terrified Stede was going to agree to something with a smile on his face and a complete misunderstanding about what it really meant. Rather fun, to be honest. I hadn't expected fun to be part of a convention. I sort of invited myself to this one, Stede was saying happily. You'll have to tell me what... Oh, Edward, I'm sorry, I got a little sidelined. With someone then? The stranger said with a wistful sort of smile, but his eyes remained on Stede. Yeah, we're here together, Ed said, and didn't quite crowd Stede, but he tried to make it clear that he was off limits. Making friends again, Stede? One can never have too many friends, Stede answered primly, but his hazel eyes flicked to the other man. It was very nice to meet you. Huh? Oh, yeah, nice to meet you too. The other man blinked a few times as if he was confused, but Ed didn't see what was so damn confusing. Stede was obviously dismissing him. Maybe catch you around? Oh, I'm sure you'll see me around, Stede chirped, in what Ed hoped didn't sound like some sort of promise. Have fun. I love your fancy harness, by the way. It wasn't that Ed had planned to get drunk, but by the time they had another round of drinks, he was tired and stressed. He kept imagining Stede accidentally getting someone's room card or taking up an invite to a play party. And Mary and Anne seemed to be loving every fucking moment since they were dropping hints left and right. It was never quite enough to be obvious, but just enough to be a huge fucking problem. Have a fucking drink, Teach, Mary teased. You need to relax, just like that guy, remember Anne, at that Halloween thing? Anne threw back her head and cackled. Oh my yes, it was a Halloween mask party. Mary's starting to work, and this business fuck was just standing there whining all about it. I'm stuck, she mocked and laughed. Anne had to fucking time down to cut it off, and him screaming all the while. Mary laughed. The trick to getting off a gimp mask, Anne said, is patience. You have to... Well, here. She lifted her leg, and before Ed could react, Anne was straddling Steve's lap. You have to peel while you cut. She leaned in and basically fucking ground against Steve's lap. You like the ladies, right, Stede? Pardon, I'll go get the next round, Stede stuttered, trying to get up. Before he could break free, Anne leaned in and gave him a smacking kiss. What a gentleman, she insisted before sliding off his lap. Stede all but ran to the bar, and Ed wanted to scream. God damn it, can the two of you calm the fuck down? Ed growled. I like him, okay, but that doesn't mean you can torture him. You always went for the artsy outsider, Mary snickered as her wife slid closer. And throwing one leg over her wife and leaning against Ed, added, he's a heartbreaker, that one. Ed was probably going to come back with some amazing snarky response that was perfect, but Stede showed back up a tray of drinks, including water. We have an early morning tomorrow, so you should get some water in you too, Edward, he explained as he carefully clung to Ed's side, far away from the ladies. Your partner sure takes good care of you, Anne purred. I think respect and care are important in any partnership. I respect Edward and I care for him. I work him hard, but he performs beautifully for me because of that respect and care, Stede said with his sweet little smile. And fuck, Ed wasn't sure if he heard himself sometimes. So Ed is your only partner? Mary asked, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Anne and I find that things are more fun with more partners in the mix. Stede brightened at that. Oh, well, we've talked about elevating some of our friends, you know. Although one day is truly lovely, but right now it feels like he has so much on his plate, and I don't know that he could commit to partnership right now. So you'd like a partner to commit? Anne cooed, pulling close to Stede. I think that's so refreshing, isn't it, Mary? Someone to commit. Mary shot her a dirty look. Oh, you want to commit, do you? Mary growled. Well, is there a fucking echo in here? Anne snarled back. Stede was quick to try and deflect the tension. Commitment is important, but the most important is communication. You two seem to have some interesting communication, he added politely. Did I hear Edward say you two are giving a panel later? What was that called again? Anne poured herself over the table, trying to show off her cleavage. Wrong bait, Ed thought with some bitter joy. We're sitting on the poly panel, she purred. You'll attend, won't you? Anne reached out to grab Stede's hand. As he jerked away almost reflexively, he spilt their drinks. Oh, goodness, I'm sorry. Let me go get some towels. He apologised and scrambled up in an obvious attempt at an escape. Ed didn't blame him at all. He was just happy that he got out of the zone of chaotic lesbians for a moment. Ed glowered at the duo. Will you calm the fuck down? He's a nice guy and you're making this weird. Anne threw herself back into Mary's arms, both of them cackling. Have you even fucked him yet? Mary mocked. You haven't, have you? "You called it, babe," Anne laughed, giving her wife a smacking kiss. He still wasn't sure how the pair of them knee-jerked between their wild emotions. "Not even giving him a handy?" "Fuck both of you," Ed snapped, his temper finally starting to fray. "Stede's a fucking nice guy and he doesn't deserve your insane bullshit." He wasn't sure what Stede must be thinking, especially since Ed had introduced them as his friends. He should have known the moment he'd heard Mary's tone that they would arse deep in the fuckery involving each other. Mary seemed ready to continue on her game, but Anne suddenly slid back in the chair with a soft noise. It was a bit like she'd suddenly had all of her strings cut as her face softened into a rather dreamy-looking expression. She blinked her eyes a few times and nearly looked like they were about to slide shut entirely. "It's so fucking sparkly in here," she purred. "The fuck is wrong with you?" Ed startled at Anne's weird change, but his suspicion began to grow as Mary let out a low, throaty chuckle. Stede returned with a small stack of towels from the bar, gripping them like they might be some sort of shield, but paused when he saw Anne. She was leaning towards Mary, an arm flung over the shorter woman's shoulders, and a smile on her face that showed every one of her teeth. Hey, Blondie is back," Anne cooed, drooping all over her wife. "You alright?" Stede considered Anne briefly, a little frown appearing between his brows. "A little too much to drink?" "That, or the little surprise I slipped in your glass," Mary teased, eyes glinting with victory. "I told you I had a little present for you." Fuck, Ed hated when they'd loop others into their weird psychosexual games. Fucking hell. Ed bit off a much longer tirade of ire at these insane, chaotic women. "Let's just go, Stede. I'm pretty sure Anne's ready to be alone with Mary," he snapped. "Maybe," Anne giggled, "unless Blondie's bored and wants to visit. You want a little pickle-tickle?" "Nope, we're going." Ed put an arm around Stede's shoulders as he set down the towels and stared after the two women. "Shouldn't we help them? I mean, did she..." Stede looked around and whispered, "Really slip something in her drink?" "Fuck, probably. Though trust me, Stede, those two have negotiated it," he said casually and wanted to bite his half-drunk tongue. "I mean, it's sort of their thing. Just trust me, it's better to walk away before they draw us in." "Oh." Stede blinked his eyes slowly and then gave that frown again. "I know you don't really talk about clients, but are they, because that would make sense." "Those two? Mate, if they tried to see me as a therapist, I'd give it all up and go sail the fuck to sea before trying to help them." Ed let out a laugh, unable to help himself. Still, Stede shifted and Ed realised he still had an arm lightly looped over his shoulders, which, that was probably a weird thing for him to be doing to his friend and business partner, but taking it off now was even fucking weirder, drawing attention to it, wasn't it? I could offer to... "Stede, look at me." Ed paused and gave his little head shake. "You do not want to crawl into the anarchy that is Anne and Mary. I don't want to. Nobody wants to. That way lies madness." "And tickling, apparently," Stede muttered, before Ed let out a soft laugh, dropping his arm away from the other man regretfully. "Do you want another screaming orgasm?" Ed added that to the list of things he had never expected to hear Stede Bonnet say, and that he really wished was under different circumstances. They paused near the entrance of the bar, where there were a few more people. Most of them were at least normally outfitted. It all ran high to leather, but that was fine, and Ed really could admit he wanted a drink. If nothing else, it would help him sleep while Stede was in the same room as him, in pyjamas. Pyjamas that Ed didn't really want to think too closely about since he normally slept in the nude. Shit, he'd have to wear something to bed. "Yeah, one more, but then we're going to bed, right?" He caved, and Stede's smile grew a little wider before reaching out to snatch Ed's hand. He was warm and solid, the palm soft against his own, so he wanted to spread his fingers to slot in with the other man's. The urge was great enough that he bit his lip and just let Stede guide him to the end of the bar. At least it would keep people from actively trying to crawl into Stede's pants, as if any of them knew just how special the blonde really was when they eyed him like a piece of meat. He settled on a bar stool and finally pulled his phone out, trying not to wince at midnight time, and instead saw several text messages waiting for him. More importantly, the text messages came from one specific person. Fuck. Goddamn fucking shit. Ed had a few people that he tended to seek out in places like this, and one had messaged his Blackbeard account wanting to hook up. Henry was an interesting guy, sort of fun, not really amazing, but good to pass the time with and work out stress. Henry also loved being used as living furniture, so he decided to play along with the game in his room because he'd left word to let Henry have a room key because Edward Teach was a fucking idiot. He glanced up at Stede, who pushed his drink to him and swallowed. He had to get upstairs and get Henry out of his room before Stede saw him. He was positive Henry had roped, probably literally, someone into tying him up as a chair or table because he'd done it several times before, and shit, Ed liked it most of the time, not today. Today he felt like he wanted to scream. Hey, I'm gonna go to the bathroom real quick. Be back in a few. He excused himself to Stede's nod and flashed a look around the room. Luck, apparently, hadn't deserted him entirely, since Jackie was ruling over the area just outside of the bar with one of her husbands. The Norwegian one. The fuck was his name? Swede? Something that was basically a title since no one knew the guy's name. What mattered that Jackie was far more trustworthy than Mary and Anne? The only thing better would have been gentle, sweet Fang. Hey, Jackie! He waved his hand and got a narrow-eyed look from the imposing woman before he offered her a smile. Sorry, can I grab a favour? What sort of favour? You ain't getting upgraded to a honeymoon suite. Heard you already have a stay over, she admonished, and he puffed out a laugh. It's not like that. Listen, a co-worker found out I was giving a talk here and came to support me. I just need someone to keep an eye and make sure he doesn't get into trouble, Ed explained and gestured towards the bar. He has no idea what ChamberCon really is. What the fuck you bringing a normal co-worker here for? Jackie's brow quirked up in amusement. It's a long damn story. That's him at the end of the bar, curly blonde hair. He gestured again, grateful. Stede seemed to be playing on his phone as he sipped his drink, probably Googling who knew what that he'd overheard from Mary and Anne. Jackie glanced over and tipped her head a little bit to one side, and both of her eyebrows shot up before staring back at Ed. Blondie, the guy playing on his phone, you want me to keep him from figuring out this is a fetish convention? She asked. We're talking about the same guy, right? That's the one you were hiding all the kinky shit from? Fuck, yes, okay, I know, he's nice to look at, and please, I'll owe you a favour, but I need to get a naked man out of my hotel room before he finds out. He puts on a plaintive voice. Any favour, I'll put on a demo if you want. He's like a golden retriever, Jackie, too friendly and no idea what's going on. Oh, now that's fucking nice, Blackbeard offering me a favour. She let out a rich laugh and shook her head. Yeah, you go on and take care of your naked problem. Jackie will keep Blondie out of any trouble. Thank you, Ed managed, trusting Jackie that much. She might be intimidating and a damn near force of nature, but she was good on her word. One elevator and an undignified run down the hallway, and Ed was untying a very naked Henry with a mixture of annoyance and apologies. Listen, I told you, don't fucking let people tie you up and leave you if you can't get out. That was sort of the point, that you'd let me out, Henry grumbled, wiggling back into a pair of pants. Yeah, sorry, I got a roommate this time around. Long damn story. Shit, take the rope with you. You didn't leave anything else? Ed glanced around frantically, trying to imagine Stede finding something. Great, fantastic. Listen, why don't you just go and knock on Mary and Anne's door? Pretty sure they'd be happy to have you. Okay, that was me, but also it'd be funny, so he thought as Henry snickered while Ed ushered him into the hallway. By the time Ed got back in the elevator to the main floor, his face was flushed, his knee was hurting, and he was starting to think that if he so much as sat down, he was going to pass out. He hadn't been this stressed out when he'd been in college. He smoothed back a few flyaways from his hair as he passed by Abshir at the front desk and made a beeline to the bar, and Stede, who was sitting with Jackie. Stede, who was tipping his head towards her and talking animatedly about something, and had the oddest little smirk on his face that made Ed wonder just what they were talking about. Him? Fuck, it was probably him. Hey, Stede, I see you met the amazing woman that put this all together. Ed tried not to sound out of breath as he got within talking range. Oh yeah, Steve and I have been talking a whole lot, haven't we? Jackie flashed a predatory smile at Stede, who ducked his head. It's Stede, actually, he said softly, and gave Jackie a look that almost seemed to be an attempt to hide a giggle. What the fuck had they been talking about? I was wondering where you were though, Ed. Are you okay? You look flushed. Yep, never better, Ed lied and reached over for his drink, throwing it back in the long gulp that barely let him taste the sweetness. Whew, sorry, I was gone so long. That's fine, Jackie was great company. Stede flashed her another smile. Thank you for the drink. Well, I'll be seeing you two tomorrow. Busy fucking day. Jackie stood up and gave her red coat a little tug. Jackie has to go fuck with the schedule. Good luck. Let me know if I can help, Ed said, and turned enough to mouth, I owe you. Ed jolted a little bit as a hand brushed his forehead. Fingers pressed against him lightly, and he jerked his head to stare at Stede, who pressed a palm against him. It was soft and warm feeling as it rested there for only a moment before drawing away. Apologies, you just looked a little feverish, Stede murmured as he dropped his hand again. I'm so sorry, Ed. I know you probably had plans tonight and I've gone and spoilt them by showing up. Maybe I should... Nah, mate, you always make shit better. It should have been a lie, but it was the truth, despite the fact he was stressed the fuck out and half drunk. Having Stede around was still fun. Come on, let's get to bed. Go to bed. Yeah? Of course, Stede smiled at him, that shy little smile that always made Ed want to kiss it off his face. The man shouldn't come armed with a dimple and that smile. It was criminally unfair. He promised there'd be a cot, Ed repeated the words with a mix of despair and irritation both as he stared around the hotel room. There's no cot, Stede. He'd repeated that sentence about 6 times, and each time it felt about as insane as the first time, while saying it to Stede, who was doing his nightly routine. Because of course Stede had a skincare regime and was taking this far better than Ed was as he rubbed his forehead. He called down to the front desk, and Abshir had been very apologetic, saying that there seemed to be many people sharing rooms and he could offer pillows to be sent up. Which, okay, he was not making Stede sleep on the floor, and neither would he. The bed is a king. We'll be fine. We can make a wall of pillows if you're really worried about your virtue, Stede teased as he leaned out the bathroom. I know, but Ed trailed off and rubbed his brows a little bit. There was supposed to be a cot. Stede rustled in the bathroom some more. There were little clicks and the sound of water, all very domestic things. Ed had already changed, digging around in his luggage until he'd found a pair of loose boxers and a t-shirt that wasn't too tight. It would do for sleepwear. He'd had to get dressed quickly while Stede had been locked in the bathroom, since restraints, neatly coiled ropes, leather harnesses and even a leather paddle were hidden in the biggest case. He'd buried them under his clothes just in case, but still, he did not need to look at those items and think about Stede. Maybe I can just call down to the desk again. He glanced over at the phone before the bathroom light turned off and Stede came out. Edward! He jerked his head up at his full name, firmer than Stede's normal soft voice, and Ed felt a small twinge of dismay. Stede was dressed in a set of soft-looking, were they silk? Pale sea green pyjamas that boasted a pair of shorts that rode up high on his thighs and exposed the length of his pale, well-muscled legs. The shorts were slit a bit high, nothing that was outright shocking, but it was more skin than he'd ever seen on Stede before. The top was a short-sleeve pyjama top with SB embroidered on one pocket in white, because Stede was the most delightfully extra person Ed had ever known, who was going to get into bed with him. There was supposed... Edward. Shh. Stede came in closer, tilting his head. You had such a long day, and you've been so accommodating for me, haven't you? You were such a good tour guide. Yeah, I guess, Ed managed as Stede moved to sit beside him. A hand reached out and lightly touched his shoulder. You're tired. It's been a long day. And why shouldn't you be tired? Stede murmured, his voice lowering into something that Ed wanted to wrap around himself. You've been so perfect, you've been working so hard, you deserve to rest, don't you? Suppose so. And we're going to rest, aren't we? You're going to slide into those soft covers and rest your head down for me so you can sleep, Stede continued, and Ed wanted to squirm. It was like at the class. Go on, scoot up the bed and get under. Ed definitely wasn't sure how to react to that, except it was pulling at a part of him that was enjoying the firm direction, the soft command. It was a bit easier to just listen to Stede instead of argue, especially given that he'd been drinking and he was exhausted. It wasn't like Stede was wrong. They could make a pillow wall. The bed was huge. It didn't have to be weird sharing it. It could just be normal. He kept that in mind as he sighed and slipped out to rock back the covers and squirmed his way beneath the bed. The covers were cool and soft, the mattress pleasantly firm as he wiggled his way down beneath him. Stede's smile was pleased as he actually pulled the covers up and tucked them firmly around Ed. It was just the sort of care that Stede took him as a matter of course, but as Stede hit the light by the bed, he did a singularly odd thing. "Good boy, Edward," he murmured and smoothed a hand down the blanket. "Sweet dreams." And what the fuck was Ed supposed to do with that? The end.
That was Just Keep Your Eyes on Me by KalansPhantom and Pastor of Muppets, and narrated by Gutis, aka Cheesecake 3 on AO3. If you'd like to read the rest, check out the link to the full story on AO3 in the show notes, and be sure to give them a comment and a kudos. If you'd like to narrate anything for the Our Flag Means Fanfiction podcast, get the author's permission, then send us your audio file to ourflagmeansfanfiction@gmail.com. And for memes and Our Flag related hilarity, give us a follow on Instagram at ourflagmeansfanfiction, all one word. Bye!